Let me ask you something real. You consider yourself as smart and to some extent successful. You reflect, maybe you even meditate, and you've read all the books about success and how to lead a better life and so on. And yet, somehow it's not 100% working. Somehow you catch yourself falling back into the same old pattern over and over again. And this applies to many important decisions, to your career, to your life, to your relationship. Or maybe you say something in a conversation that immediately after you will regret. Or you want to sit down to think clearly. And somehow you end up in the same old painful loop. And now you heard about this new advice, metacognition. Think about your own thinking. That sounds great. That sounds simple. Because probably something is wrong in the way you think. But here's what almost no one tells you. And what I've learned, both in my own personal work, but also in guiding other midlife professionals through real transformations. The problem with metacognition is that it only scratches the surface of what is really relevant. Because it's not only your conscious thinking that's sabotaging you. There's a hidden part within you that is running secretly the show. And with your conscious mind, you will never be able to see it. So what do we mean when we talk about metacognition? Metacognition is the ability to observe, to evaluate, but then ideally also to redirect your thoughts into a different direction, into a more positive way of thinking. And many neuroscientists call it the highest cognitive function. It's acting as the CEO, the manager of your thoughts. And to be honest, that sounds very powerful. But that's also where most recommendations stop. They're trying to sell you some breathing tricks, journaling prompts, or other mindset hacks. And I don't want to dismiss that, right? I get it. There is a place for such things, and they're important. And building up such habits can really help you. But usually they're not sufficient. I've watched many intelligent, self-aware people, and that includes myself. I was working like that for more than 20 years, and I applied all of the tricks. But still, for a long time, I stayed stuck. And that's happening also to many professionals I work with. Not because we were not trying hard enough, or because we did something obviously wrong, but because we were missing something fundamental. And this is about something that lives below the surface of everything you can consciously observe. Now let me pull up quickly the analogy of an iceberg. You know, the iceberg, you have only 10%. The tip of the iceberg is actually what's visible, and that is your conscious mind. That is what our thinking is about. But the other 90% are below the surface, and they include a lot of powerful elements. They include your beliefs, your values, but also your childhood trauma, your experiences, and all the things you decided at one point in your life that you don't need them right now, and you stored them away for later use. And that's what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow contains old wounds, it contains the rejected parts of yourself, but it contains also the survival strategies that you built in your childhood and that you never questioned. The shadow is not necessarily something bad. Actually, the shadow has good intentions. It tries to help you. It tries to make your life better. It tries to improve your situation. But it has a different viewpoint than your conscious, your rational mind. And that means the decisions you make about your career, about your reactions, and about how you're sabotaging yourself are not what you consciously control. It's to a large extent decided by your shadow. Now, here is an uncomfortable truth. Your metacognition can work perfectly. You can control your thoughts, you can observe your thoughts. It doesn't matter. Because your thought CEO doesn't control the real driver. And to access that, it's really important that you escape your common pattern and do something different. Let me give you an example. I'm fasting every year for between 10 and 14 days. When I started that like 8 or 10 years ago, in the beginning, it was more about my health, but it was also because I wanted to prove something to myself. Not even to other people, but to myself. And at that time, I started to observe my thoughts. And I believed, okay, this is what metacognition is about. But then when I did it the second and third time, something changed. Because I didn't have to prove anything to myself anymore. I knew I could do it. When I stripped off the food and my routines and the distraction I had during my normal life, I started noticing something. Not just my thoughts, but the emotional charge underneath them. And that my irritation wasn't really about hunger or about missing food. It was about the restlessness that showed up every time I got close to a decision I'd been avoiding. So I learned something important. I learned how to view things differently, view myself differently, from a different angle, from a non-logical, non-rational angle. And that's not easy. I mean, I'm an engineer, I'm a technical person, so that was something in the beginning kind of strange to me. But then by the third or by the fourth time, I stopped being surprised by what I surfaced. Actually, I started expecting it. It became part of the journey. The story I told myself about needing to be productive to feel worthy. The way I avoided certain decisions. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because that was just how I did it. And this recognition in the beginning is actually not comfortable, especially if you have it only in your early 40s, because it's shedding some light on something. The question immediately comes up, how long have I been blind? How long didn't I see what's happening? And that could lead easily to the conclusion that I have failed for so many years. But that's actually not true, and I also don't want you to believe that. Because the decisions I made at the time before, from a certain perspective, they were correct. And they served me, they served my life, and they brought me to where I am today. And I'm grateful for that. But still, for the first part of my career, my shadow had been in control the whole time. And if this is resonating with you, if you can identify yourself with that, stay with me, because now it's getting interesting. It's actually very common that this recognition shows up in midlife, in let's say between 35 and 45, 50, because in this phase of life, something changes. And I see similar pattern in the people I work with. Let me give you 3 examples that come up constantly. The first one is, I must always be the responsible one. That means we're loading the heavy weight of responsibility always on our own shoulders. That actually has to do something with guilt. The patterns are actually very similar if you blame yourself for something that happened or if you blame somebody else. It's just surfacing in a different way. I felt for many years the same. Persons who are feeling that, they're usually very competent, they're reliable, and their goal is to always deliver. And many people depend on them. And at one point in time, they're getting exhausted. But they can't stop. Because somewhere early in their life, being responsible became the condition for being loved. And now, every time they try to delegate or set a boundary, or simply to rest, the shadow pulls them back. Their metacognition, their CEO here, tells them they're being strategic. They're efficient, they're necessary, and they're needed. They cannot stop. But the thinking can't see the wound within. The second pattern is, if I succeed, I lose connection. That's actually people that are always holding themselves back, and they always think they're not worthy of success. They're not worthy of having the better job. They're not worthy of having more money. They're getting close to a real breakthrough, and what happens? Something is pulling the handbrake. They will call it fear or failure, or bad timing, or not the right moment. And it's the shadow that is protecting an old belief. The belief that being too visible, too successful, too much, too rich means being alone. So they sabotage themselves at the finish line. Every single time. The last pattern is, I'm not enough unless I'm producing. That's also one I had for many years. This person never stops. They optimize, they plan, they execute. And they truly cannot understand why they feel empty. They always have to fill their calendar, and they think they always have to improve. It's not getting better. Because the doing, the productivity, is not the problem. Actually, the doing is the avoidance. They don't want to rest because they think it's wasted time. Even if they have a free minute, they think they have to fill it with a YouTube video to learn something new or reading some article. And then eventually they're trying meditation, because meditation is to calm down, to connect with yourself. But they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing even the meditation to optimize it. And that's not the goal, so it won't work for them. All the 3 patterns cannot be solved intellectually. We have to go deeper to really solve it from within. Now, these problems I'm describing here is something all of us are facing to a larger or lower extent. But I think it becomes very important and especially urgent in your 40s and 50s. Because I mentioned it before, something changes in this period of life. But I want to make clear here that midlife is not a crisis. It's more a confrontation. And that means that the identity that got you there, your ego, your persona, the role you're playing in the world, it suddenly starts to feel like it doesn't fit anymore. and it won't bring you any further. That can be in your career, that the job that made sense at 32 feels suddenly hollow at 47. And the drive that you had in your 30s, that felt like ambition, starts to feel like running from something. And this is the beginning of what Carl Jung called the second half of life. It starts at the point where the psyche actually stops asking, how do I succeed? And starts asking, who am I actually? And that shift is not always comfortable, but it's also not a breakdown. It's your individuation calling. It also doesn't mean that your first part of your life was wrong. It was right at the time. Because when we are 20, 25, 30, we need to go out in the world. We need to build our role in the world. We need to build the version of ourselves that can succeed. And that's not lost. It's just not enough anymore. So it's important to confront yourself with these new questions. And if you don't answer them consciously, your shadow will answer it for you. The shadow will make your decisions in your relationships, in your career, and in the pattern you can't seem to break. And this is the moment where real metacognition becomes not just useful, but absolutely necessary. And let's be clear here, Jung is not talking about self-improvement. He called it individuation, becoming whole, becoming who you are. And you're not becoming who you are by expanding yourself further into the outside world. You actually have to redirect your focus into the inner world, into the parts you've spent your life avoiding. And succeeding in that is true cognitive autonomy. Not to optimize the thoughts you have already access to, but to expand the territory of what you actually see. And that's why metacognition is not only about your psyche, about your thinking. Actually, scientists and researchers are now training AI on what they call artificial metacognition. You notice it probably already in ChatGPT or the other AIs that you're using. The machines can observe and adjust their own reasoning. And there it's working perfectly. But AI doesn't have a shadow. AI doesn't have repressed pain. AI doesn't have traumas. It doesn't have unconscious wounds from childhood. So it doesn't need survival strategies for that. And that's actually not a small difference. That's the main difference between us and machines. And that's what makes us uniquely human. The capacity to go into the dark parts of ourselves. And all of us have dark parts. The point is not avoiding them, but to integrating them and come back more whole. And that is something no algorithm can ever do. That's what makes you relevant. And to protect this capacity and to develop it deliberately, that is what I mean by protecting your human essence. Especially today in a world that's rapidly outsourcing thinking to machines. The most radical thing you can do is learn to see what you've been avoiding. That's your edge. If you're willing to use it, that's your differentiation. Now let's have a look on how we can do that. Metacognition without shadow work is like driving with one eye closed. It's like looking only 2 meters ahead of you when you're driving. You're probably avoiding the potholes, but you don't get anywhere. So here are 2 practices that I actually use that are simple and that are not about performance. It's just about building a habit. Practice 1 is the 60-second shadow scan. This you can apply after any strong emotion, after big decisions, or after a triggered moment. Ask yourself, what part of you wanted this? And what part wasn't allowed to speak? Let me give you an example. A few months ago, I was in a coaching conversation that went sideways. The client pushed back hard, and I felt some defensiveness I didn't expect. So I wrapped up the session, I sat with it, and I ran the scan. What part of me wanted to be right in that moment? The part that still ties being challenged to being inadequate? That's not a coaching problem. That's a shadow pattern. And I would have missed it completely if I just moved on to another call. And that's what the scan helps you with. It turns triggered moment into data points. There will be some discomfort when you're doing this, but that's not a problem. That's actually the signal you're finally seeing clearly. The second practice is dream access. So every morning, spend 2 or 3 minutes writing down whatever you remember from your dreams. In the beginning, it won't be a lot, but fragments are just fine. And don't jump directly into interpretation. Just write down what happens, what you remember. And then over time, months, not days, the patterns emerge. For me, some of the clearest insights I've had about my own direction in life came not from planning sessions. It came from my dream journal, from my unconscious, because that bypasses the filter completely. Your unconscious doesn't lie. It just speaks a different language, and you need to learn that. And the more you listen, the more fluent you will become. But just start small, because consistency beats perfection every time. Your shadow is hiding. It doesn't want to be found. But that's exactly where your freedom lives. And this process is what Nietzsche means when he says become who you are. But you can't become who you are if you don't first see who you've unconsciously been. Most people think about their thinking. The rare ones are willing to meet what's been thinking them, the driver. And that's the difference between metacognition as a productivity tool and metacognition as real transformation. One of them keeps you functional, but the other one sets you free. So ask yourself honestly, right now, are you thinking about your thinking? Or are you still thinking from inside patterns you haven't seen yet? And if this landed for you, I built a free archetype test that shows you exactly which shadow pattern is running your life right now. The link is down there in the description. It takes only about 10 minutes, and most people find it accurate and helpful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.